In a small village nestled between thick forests and winding rivers, the earth was barren and dry. The once rich soil had turned to dust, and the once bountiful crops had withered under the scorching sun. The villagers lived in despair, and their homes were mere shadows of their former selves. The rivers that once flowed with abundance now trickled faintly, and the sky above seemed perpetually grey, as if the heavens themselves mourned the people's fate. Long ago, the village had known peace and prosperity. But that was before the treachery of King Olamide. He was a man consumed by greed and a thirst for power. When his brother, Prince Adedeji, ascended to the throne, Olamide grew jealous. One fateful night, driven by ambition and rage, he killed his own brother, taking the throne by force. The gods, furious at the fratricide, cursed the land and the people. Crops failed, animals perished, and children died young. For generations, the village had suffered under this curse, and there seemed to be no hope of salvation. The elders of the village often gathered around the sacred fire, recounting the tale of Olamide's betrayal, warning that the gods would not forgive such a grave sin. They spoke in hushed voices of the prophecy: a child born of the bloodline of the old king, raised by a widow, would cleanse the land, but at a great cost. Only through sacrifice would the curse be lifted. Among the people of this cursed village lived a poor widow named Adura. Her life was one of struggle, but her heart overflowed with love for her only son, Nifemi. His father had passed away when Nifemi was but a babe, and Adura had been left to raise him alone. Despite their poverty, Nifemi's presence brought her joy. The villagers, too, admired the boy. He had a gift, a strange, otherworldly wisdom. His laughter was bright, and even in the darkest times, he brought a sense of hope to those around him. Though the village was poor, Nifemi had a warmth and curiosity about life. His feet often ran through the fields, and his voice echoed with questions about the world. He would speak with the birds and animals, and sometimes it felt as if he understood the language of nature itself. But the curse that plagued the village weighed heavily on them all. Famine struck every year. The children grew sickly, and families buried loved ones far too soon. It was as if the land itself had forgotten how to nurture life. In the evenings, Adura would tell Nifemi stories of a time long ago, when the kingdom was prosperous and the people lived in peace. She would speak of King Olamide's betrayal and the curse that followed, but she always ended the story with a prayer that one day, somehow, they would be freed from their suffering. As Nifemi grew, so did his connection to the land. He spent his days learning from nature, tending to the small patch of garden his mother had cultivated, and helping the villagers in any way he could. It was clear to everyone that Nifemi was no ordinary child. When he touched the soil, flowers bloomed. When he spoke, even the animals seemed to listen. The elders, though they dared not say it aloud, began to whisper that Nifemi was the child of destiny, a child born to cleanse the land of its curse. But as much as Nifemi loved the village, he could not ignore the suffering that surrounded him. At the age of 10, he witnessed the death of his friend, a young girl who had fallen ill with a fever that often swept through the village. The child was weak, and despite the villagers' best efforts, she died before the sun rose the next day. This loss hit Nifemi hard, and for the first time, he asked his mother a question that had been gnawing at his heart. "Why do we suffer so, mother?" he asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Why do children like her have to die?" Adura, her eyes wet with tears, took him into her arms. "It is the curse of our land, my son," she whispered. "It is the punishment for the sins of a king who betrayed his brother and the gods. But we must keep faith. One day, the curse will end." That night, Nifemi lay awake, staring at the stars through the cracks in the thatched roof. He wondered about the gods. Why had they forsaken the people? And if he was indeed the child of destiny, why had he been chosen for such a terrible task? Was it his blood that could end the curse? Or was he just another helpless soul caught in the web of fate? As the years passed, the villagers grew more desperate. The crops failed again, and the river ran drier than ever. The elders began speaking of the prophecy more often, and soon, the whispers of Nifemi's destiny reached his ears. Some believed he was the one foretold to save them, others feared that he would be lost in the attempt. One day, a strange man appeared in the village, an old priest named Oba. His eyes glinted with an ancient wisdom, and his voice carried a weight that seemed to shake the very earth. He had come, he said, to find Nifemi, for the gods had sent him on a mission. He had spent years searching for the boy, and now that he had found him, he would guide him to fulfill the prophecy. Nifemi was hesitant, but the priest's words stirred something deep within him. As he listened to Oba speak of the ancient curse, Nifemi felt as if his destiny was unfolding before him, a path he could not deny. The priest revealed to Nifemi the truth of the prophecy, that only his blood could cleanse the land and break the curse that had held the village in its grip for so long. The priest also revealed that the sacrifice would not be an easy one. Nifemi would have to give his blood to the sacred river, where the gods would cleanse the land and free the people. But in doing so, he would lose his life. That evening, Nifemi and the priest met with Adura. The moment Nifemi told his mother of the priest's visit and the task he had been given, a deep sadness overtook her. She had known, in her heart, that this day would come, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing her son speak of his fate, was more than she could bear. "Mother, I must do this," Nifemi said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It is the will of the gods." Adura shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, my son. You are my only child. I cannot lose you." But Nifemi, feeling the weight of the prophecy, knew there was no other way. He kissed his mother on the forehead, promising her that he would return, but deep inside, he knew the truth, his return would never come. The journey to the sacred river was long and perilous. The land grew darker and more foreboding as they traveled, and the air felt thick with the weight of destiny. Along the way, Nifemi saw the suffering of the other villages that lay in the shadow of the curse. Children lay in the dirt, too weak to rise. Crops had turned to dust, and the people had lost their hope. They begged Nifemi to help them, but he remained silent. He could do nothing for them, for he was the only one who could save the land. At night, around the campfire, Oba spoke of the old times, of the kingdom before King Olomite's treachery. The priest shared stories of the gods and their wrath, of how the land had flourished before the bloodshed. Nifemi, though filled with sadness, began to understand the true nature of the task that awaited him. It was not just about cleansing the land, it was about restoring balance. The gods had taken their revenge, but they were merciful too. They had given Nifemi the chance to set things right. Finally, they arrived at the sacred river. The river was a place of great power, believed to be the boundary between the mortal world and the divine. Here, the ritual would take place. Here, Nifemi would offer his blood to the river and cleanse the land. As he stood at the water's edge, the priest began the chant that would summon the gods. Nifemi closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mother's love, the villagers' hopes, and the land's suffering pressing upon him. He knew what must be done, but in his heart, he hesitated. Could he really give his life to save the land? With a deep breath, Nifemi knelt by the river and let the blood flow. As it mingled with the water, the river began to glow with a soft, golden light. The wind picked up, and the earth trembled. The gods had accepted the sacrifice. As Nifemi's blood mixed with the river, a great power surged through the land. The barren fields began to bloom, and the dry rivers began to flow with fresh water. The sky cleared, and a gentle rain began to fall upon the earth. The curse had been lifted. But as the land healed, Nifemi's body began to weaken. His vision blurred, and his breath came in short gasps. He felt the life draining from him. His task had been completed, but the price was his life. As Nifemi's life faded, the gods appeared before him. They spoke of his courage and sacrifice, and how his blood had saved the land. They offered him eternal rest, but Nifemi chose to remain. He could not leave the land he had saved, the people he had loved. His spirit would watch over them always. Back in the village, the people awoke to a new world. The crops were abundant, and the river flowed freely. The children, once sickly, now played in the streets, their laughter filling the air. The curse was lifted, and the village was reborn. Adura, though heartbroken, felt a strange peace in her heart. She knew that Nifemi had fulfilled his destiny. His sacrifice had saved them all. Years passed, and the village thrived. The story of Nifemi, the boy who had given his blood to save the land, became legend. Statues were erected in his honor, and songs were sung in his memory. His name lived on in the hearts of the people, a symbol of hope and sacrifice. Adura, now an old woman, would often tell the children the story of her son. She spoke of his wisdom, his kindness, and the love that had driven him to do the impossible. And as the sun set over the fertile land, the people of the village knew that the child of destiny had given them more than just a future, he had given them the greatest gift of all.